You are a big fan of true crime podcasts, especially the ones that leave you hanging on to every word and every unimaginable detail. I get it. I spent a large portion of my life knee-deep in these horrifying stories, and I know they can pull you in the strangest of ways. The downside, they're often tragic, gruesome, and downright disturbing, leaving you with a heaviness you didn't really sign up for. My name is Dave Sweet. For 25 years, I worked as a patrol officer, an undercover police officer, and recently, a homicide detective, where for 14 years, I specialized in missing person and suspicious death investigations.
And my name is Nicole. I am a true crime fan, but I especially love the positive takeaways that so many of these stories can bring. The resilience that is built, the community that rallies, the human connection. All of which can come as a byproduct of a terrible crime, which in my opinion, far outshines the evil. I love a true crime, but I also love to come away from a podcast feeling educated, inspired, and eager to make a big impact on those around me.
If that sounds a lot like you too, then you're in the right place. Welcome to The Ride Along, a feel-good true crime podcast.
On each episode of The Ride Along, we'll unpack criminal cases that Dave has been involved in and discover key lessons that he has learned through every one. With his masterful interrogation abilities and strong detective and undercover work, he has sent many a criminal behind bars. And through it all, he has followed his simple yet profound mantra: leave people better than how you found them. So hop in, buckle up, and lock the doors. This is The Ride Along.
Man found dead in a random attack.
Worried about a spike in domestic violence.
Hey, Dave.
Hi, Nicole.
It's so nice being here with you today.
Oh, Nicole, I am so excited. I am so excited for what is to come.
Yeah.
Over this first season of The Ride Along.
Yes.
And so happy to have you along.
Yes, this is our inaugural episode. Yes. And as we mentioned in the intro, Dave, you're a veteran homicide detective. Mm-hmm. And I'm not at all. But I am a civilian in the city that you help to keep safe. And just for our listeners and viewers, just a little bit more about me. I have a background in journalism and television broadcasting. I've worked in front of the camera and behind the camera, writing, producing, directing television programs, commercials, and digital media as it has evolved throughout the years. When I was introduced to you, let me tell you, I knew the stories that this guy would resonate with so many other true crime fanatics. And that's why we're here today. This episode is all about living a life of service. We're going to dive into some family history and learn about what led you to be called to this very demanding profession, what living a life of service truly means, and what are some early lessons you learned as a rookie cop, and now that you're retired, what wisdom you can share with us. So let's jump in here, Dave, and go all the way back to when you were first exposed to police work. Tell me about that.
Well, I mean, going all the way back, I was just a young little fella, probably about 6 or 7. I had this grandfather. He's my namesake. His name was David McMillan Young. And he was a police officer in 1904 to 1914 in New York. But he was also a man that I had never met. He was 30 years older than my grandmother. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, before I was even ever a thought, he had passed away. And so what was left was a collection of memorabilia, mementos that my mom had sort of saved in relation to her father. Some of those were like old newspaper articles. You know, I I don't know if you have anything like that in your family background at all, Nicole. But
Yeah. And we've got some like family tree books
yeah,
that are always really neat to go back on when you see there's like, 15 kids in this family and how widespread your family network actually is throughout the world. But yeah, I love going back and revisiting all that stuff.
Well, I think that you can find sort of roots to who you are when you do that.
For sure.
Or maybe you find something in common, And for whatever it was, those memorabilia pieces, those mementos that my mom had kept, introduced me to a man that I was never going to know. Mm-hmm. And some of those were these old newspaper clippings. When I was young and I started reading stories about my grandfather, one that really always caught my attention was, lead cop on a chase over rooftops. And I pictured what that was like. What would that have been like back in 1904? I pictured back then maybe a real strong imagination, but, not very tall buildings, shorter buildings,
right.
Flat tops,
yeah,
steam coming up, dim light in the street. Mm-hmm. And there's my grandfather wearing his caped jacket, jumping from rooftop to rooftop to rooftop.
like a superhero.
Like a superhero.
Yeah.
And that type of imagery, it's what ultimately kind of set that fire in my belly in terms of, I thought I wanted to follow in his footsteps, have a career that I could be out in the community, in the public, not locked in an office environment forever, and just have interactions with people just like he did. And so, yeah, that's sort of how this whole thing started. So in 1998, I joined the ranks of a large Western Canadian police service.
Yeah.
And the rest was history from there.
Makes you wonder what would have happened to you if your mom hadn't kept all of those mementos, and if you hadn't really gotten to know your grandfather in that way.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think it's I think when we all look back in our like family's past, yourself as well, like you'll learn something about like a grandmother or, even your own parents. You'll learn something. Yeah. That goes, I'm a lot like that person in this way.
Yeah, for sure.
And that was a common theme, like kind of growing up. My mom always used to say,
yeah,
you're a lot like your grandfather.
And you had his name.
And I had his name.
Yeah. So I've got your book here with me, which I've read and is great and highly recommend. It's got so many cool stories in here. But, I feel like living a life of service, it really is a calling that people are drawn to. And thank goodness that we have people like you and, those in the medical profession and education as well. But there's a lot to be said about how demanding it really is, right? So you talk about how it is our choice to be in these professions, but just as there is a cost to a life of service, there are also rewards that go deeper than any paycheck. And there's a direct correlation between serving others and our own internal happiness. So is that what you feel like really drew you into the living the life of service? Like obviously it was for others, but you also were able to recognize how much joy that brought you, right?
I think, for me, I think that was my aha moment once I was there. I didn't think I would actually, let's be honest, when I first joined, I was a young kid. I was 25 years old, full of piss and vinegar. Yeah. I wanted to drive fast, catch bad guys,
Yeah, the imagery of what we think a cop really does, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And I think what surprised me as I was kind of carving out my 20-something self was how much I enjoyed the reciprocal benefit of just serving the community.
For sure.
And serving people, and how that made me feel. It was such a nice feeling. I think anybody can relate to that. When you do something nice for somebody and you just do it out of the goodness of your heart, or you whether it's shoveling the neighbor's walk or whatever it is. Yeah. You feel like you had a more complete day.
Right.
Than if you didn't do it.
Yeah, you brought somebody joy. Yeah. And that's part of your whole mantra as well, right? Leaving people better than how you found them. And I know you recognized early on that you would jump into this career and you wanted to make it as well-rounded as possible. You were throwing yourself in the ring for opportunities that maybe others weren't going for because you knew what you kind of wanted to achieve within this life of service.
Right. Yeah, and that's true. I think like policing is so diverse.
Yeah.
It has so many different opportunities in different ways.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, in that early part of my career, it was really important to try and touch on as many of those things as possible, because I thought that was going to make me a more well-rounded police officer. And so that's why, you know, when you see the progression of my career, which we'll get into over the podcast series,
Yeah.
you'll see that progression of where my interests start to lie as I move into the undercover world,
Right.
and then guns and gang investigations, and eventually to homicide.
Yes.
When I left policing, and it was a goal of mine from the very beginning, I had two. One, I enjoyed policing in a city or in a community that, for the most part, was with the police, supported the police. And that reputation was built on the backs of officers that came before me.
Right.
So one of the things that I thought was very, very important for me was never to do anything that would undermine or destroy that reputation that they worked so hard for.
Right.
And at least in my case, I feel good that I was able to keep that commitment and that promise to myself and to them.
Yeah.
And then the second part is that when I left the career, I wanted to make sure that I wanted to make sure that I understood all of the facets of policing, or as many as I could, so that when I sit back and think about it today, I had a whole 360 panoramic view of what policing is in the city.
Yeah, have a good understanding of it all. Yeah.
And that was important to me as well. And so, so now I'm here. I reflect back on the whole thing, and I think, man, I was able to do both of those things.
Right, right.
And I'm proud of that.
Yeah, of course, as you should be. And so throughout your career, we're talking, late 90s, early 2000s, how did you find that policing actually changed and how it evolved?
Oh, yeah. I mean, so much, over the years. When I first started in a police car, first of all, I was on a team of these old guys. A lot of the guys that on my team, the members that were there, they were policing before the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Canada.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Right. So that was relatively new, we'll call it legislation for them.
Right.
Which is crazy.
Yeah, it really is.
And so in some way, shape, or form, I guess some maybe even viewed it a bit like a guideline still, not the supreme law.
Right, right.
And of course, that changed over time. Technology's changed. I used to get into a police car, and we had a little antiquated computer that was there that would kind of dispatch us to the calls. We spent most of our time when we get a call, we would write it in our notebook.
Right.
And off we'd go. We'd have this map of the city, and your old senior partner would be yelling at you on which way to go and what turn and what turn and what turn. And you've got this map, you're
and
reading
then you're turning the map.
Yes.
Put yourself in the map.
Right. That was crazy. And, nowadays with GPS and all of these things, of course, it's not like that anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
And our officers are able to get to these places much more efficiently.
Yeah.
But that wasn't technology that was afforded to me. But other things changed too. The policing went from, I think, in our community, a noble profession to not so noble a profession.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it comes from the fact that not every police officer out there has held themselves in service the same way as 99% of us have. And it's for that 1 or 2% of, we'll say, bad apples, that movements and awareness around policing malpractice really became sort of front and center.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of that in the headlines in recent years, right?
And it has had an effect.
Do you think that can be shifted?
I think it's shifting back now.
Okay.
A little bit.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that we start to realize that we need the police.
Yeah.
They aren't always welcome in every scenario, and I totally get that, but I think that the police are required for public safety.
Yeah, it's kind of like you read reviews, it's, people take the time to write a bad review so much more often than they take the time to write a positive review. Yeah. So you don't get that same, there's no balance between the positive impact that's highlighted, right? As opposed to the negative.
No, it's true.
So, I think about that when booking hotels and restaurants, and I'm like, yeah, but these are just the mad people who are talking
Right.
about it. But not to diminish, like I said, the headlines that have happened, because obviously there were some serious things and events that happened.
Of course.
But yeah, I think it's important to really highlight those positive stories as well, right?
Well, the things that we don't talk about.
Yeah, exactly.
And I've been part, and I've seen, and I've witnessed so many officers doing good things for people, and really grooving on that experience of service.
Yeah,
And I mean, countless stories of police officers stopping to play a game of street hockey with kids, or
Yes.
somebody stopping to help an elderly person shovel their walk.
Yeah, and that's part of the service,
It's
right?
all part
Yeah.
of it,
Yeah.
and they do it without fanfare. They just sort of do it behind the scenes, and
Right.
It's what made me proud to be a police officer, were those stories.
Yeah.
We all shuddered every time a police officer did something wrong, whether it was in our city or a city very, very far away.
Right.
Collectively, we shuddered.
Right.
We saw the same images, we saw the same things, and none of us sat there and went, oh, that's great.
No,
right?
of course not.
It left us all with a gross feeling.
Of course. Yeah.
But I do think it's changing back, and I think the experiment to maybe remove policing from some communities or de-police it on some level are starting to, translate into other issues that we're now seeing.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah.
Many cities across Canada are gripped with a fentanyl crisis that we've never seen before. A lot of our public parks are now inundated with all sorts of issues, social disorder type problems.
Yeah.
And this is a lack of policing.
Yeah. And so you mentioned, the police who really took the time to help the community.
Yeah.
So do you have a particular case that you can think of that really hit that message home for you? And what it meant to kind of leave people better? Like, how did you even come up with that mantra?
Well, it came from an old surly policeman that I knew from many years ago. He wore his glasses like this.
Okay.
Okay.
So down on their nose,
Down on his nose.
just looking at you,
That's
like
right.
giving you the eye.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Wore him like
Scary look that you'd get from when you're being reprimanded from a teacher.
And we had gone to a call, and it was a break and enter complaint. It was something that we'd been to many times before. It's a paper call, but there's always going to be a victim on the other side of it. One of the things with B&Es and break and enters, we classify them as property crimes, but they are so much more than that. They're a huge violation.
When you say a paper crime, could you kind of explain what that means?
Yeah. So what I mean by that is that it's a paper call.
Call. Okay.
Yeah. So, the officer's going to go out there, they're going to take the report, they're going to, make some notes.
Okay.
And
It's
they're
more
going to go
about
through
like the presence.
process.
Right.
And, document that the break and enters occurred. But often in those cases, they're very, very difficult to solve until you sort of get a series of them. So really what you're doing is you're report taking for the complainant or for the victim. Not the most exciting thing in the world if you're like that 25-year-old kid full of piss and vinegar.
Right, right.
So on this particular call, I had gone out with my partner, and because I was the junior man in the car, and that meant something back then, I was forced to kind of do everything at the house. I walked through it. I went around looking at the places of potential interest, where the culprit entered in, where he exited from, going out, speaking to some of the neighbors, all the while collecting the information that I would need for the reporting. And my partner sitting in the living room with this elderly woman, asking her about all the pictures on her fireplace mantle. Who's that, he would say. And she'd say, oh, that's my granddaughter. And he would say, oh, she looks lovely. I felt irritated by it, to be honest, because I just wanted to get moving to something better.
Yeah, something more exciting.
And right around the corner, something better comes in. It's some teammates are following a stolen vehicle. Well, back in 1998, a stolen car meant some action.
Right.
The police would turn on their lights, they would turn on their siren, and what would proceed would be a crazy police chase. And they were fun. Thankfully, as policing agencies become more progressive, the rules around pursuit and stuff have changed a lot.
Right.
Because they weren't the safest things to do either, or be part of.
Yeah, you don't see them as often
No,
anymore.
you don't.
Except in the movies.
That's right.
Yeah.
But, you know, back then that was a little bit different. It was a little bit more cowboy-ish.
Okay, yeah.
And you turn the lights on, the sirens on, you chase the bad guy.
Right.
And this has come in. And I remember going to my partner, sitting in the living room, and I said, you know, we have got to get moving. Did you hear that one of our teammates is following a stolen vehicle? And he's just like, yeah. And he continues to talk to this elderly woman. Well, I've now finished everything that I'm supposed to do at this scene. And so I'm saying, come on, we got to go, you know, because I'm knowing something's going to happen. By this point, I can hear the helicopter.
Okay.
And they're drawing up their plans. The units in the area are drawing up their plans on how they're going to try and stop this vehicle.
And young Dave wants to be a part of it.
I do. And Nicole, I wasn't going to be. That day, my partner taught me a very, very important lesson. As I stood at the front door and sort of tapped my foot to leave, you know, he continued to talk. I actually leave the house, sit in the car, and I miss the most profound part of the lesson he ultimately shares with me. But it was in that moment while I'm away, listening to the radio, feeling bad for myself, that I'm not going to be part of the best call of the night. And he says to her, outside of my earshot, you know, I'm so sorry that we've been here today or have to meet you in this way, but I can tell that you have a family that loves you very, very much, and you love them, and that's something. Not everybody has that. Well, when he gets back into the police car, he does that, pulls his glasses down to the tip of his nose, looks down at me, and he says, I'm going to let you understand something very, very important here. Oh, by this time, the police chase has started too, Nicole.
Okay.
Like, that's exactly what's happened.
Right.
They've turned on the lights, they turn on the sirens, chase, bad guy crashes, out of the vehicle. I'm listening to this all unfold on the radio.
Right.
And they have one in custody. And now I'm really feeling bad because I missed all of it. And when he gets into the car and he says to me, he says, you know what, Dave? When you and I are going to be working together, there's going to be one thing we're going to keep straight. And this guy, I'm telling you, he wasn't a guy you messed with. Like, if you were a bad guy, you didn't want to meet this guy. Okay? But he had a sensitivity and a love for people. And he said to me, he said, if you and I are going to work together from this point forward, we are going to achieve to leave every person in a better space, in a better place than we found them. And you missed the whole entire purpose of talking to her and walking her through the process. We were going to try and take away a little bit of the trauma of her experience and remind her of the important things in her life. And that's how he chose to do it in that scenario. Well, you know what? From that point forward, I tried to do the same thing each and every time. Find that silver lining, find that little glimmer that could leave somebody in a better place.
Right.
And that was an important message from him.
Yeah, and you mention in the book, it won't always be a full lecture or reprimand. Sometimes it's a single offhand remark tossed out almost like verbal gunfire that keeps ringing, making circles in your head. I still hear their words. So that was really your verbal gunfire that kind of kickstarted what your profession as a police, how it would define who you are as a police officer, right?
Yes, and so thankful for that experience. So thankful for all of those officers that were really mentors, that weren't people I expected to be mentors. They were people that, I looked at as old.
Yeah, right. And so would you say he was one of your mentors?
He absolutely
within the force?
Was, yeah.
Any others, that come to mind that taught you some lessons, maybe from some unexpected places?
Well, they came in all sorts of ways. I was in a foot chase once. And, another partner, older fella, watched me leap out of the car and start chasing this guy over fences. Well, he wheeled the car around the block and caught the guy on the other side. And as I'm drinking out of a garden hose supplied to me by a nice neighbor after the end of the foot chase, I get back in the car and he goes, "Can I ask you a question?" I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, why would you jump over fences when you could like look for gates? I thought, good point.
Yeah, right.
Right?
Right.
And there was other lessons too. I mean, again, back 25 years ago, and I think it's still the case today, whether we like it or we don't, a barroom brawl is never going to be solved with a textbook.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Unless it's being used as a weapon or a shield.
Totally.
And nothing against textbooks. But those were important things. Like, sometimes it just takes doing to get things done, not thinking.
Of course. Yeah. You got to gain that experience.
Yeah. And so there were so many. And what a great experience, that was working with those guys all those years.
And you kind of call like your career your unconventional classroom of sorts, right? Yeah. So like, can you kind of expand on that and what that means?
Sure. I mean, for me, I think the opportunities for learning are everywhere. They're all around us. I'm sure you've had them as well.
Yes, yes.
But what I would challenge everybody to do, and that's for our listeners or our viewers, I would challenge you to take an opportunity, because I don't think we often go back and share the lessons of our experiences with the people that mean the most to us, our family, our kids, those kinds of things. And we have so many opportunities to do that we don't always take on. I see the world as exactly this. There's one big, giant, unconventional classroom where the majority of the learning is not going to be done within four walls, but it's going to be done through the experiences that we have on this earth and through the interactions we have with people. And that's what I mean by it being an unconventional classroom. Yeah,
and you have to be open to that too, right?
Totally.
Those lessons. You can't just shut the world around you out. You have to recognize that these moments are lessons, and how can you actually use them in your life?
Well, you think about just the benefits, you and I began working on this process together, how much I've already taken away and learned from you. Maybe I haven't, I have also not necessarily come back to you and said, Nicole, I learned something here. Or,
right.
I really appreciate the way you prepped for today, or those kinds of things, but I'm taking it all in. And
likewise. Yeah. With
but
everything that you shared too. Yeah.
But there's this opportunity then to be able to share it to the next person.
Totally.
But we don't always do that.
Yeah. Knowledge isn't something that you should keep to yourself. If it's something that you can share and you think it'll make an impact on people, the more the merrier. Yeah. Right. So. Pablo
Picasso, he once said, I might butcher this a little bit, but he said, the meaning of life. Well, no. The purpose of life is to find your passion. The meaning of life is to give it away. And that is ultimately, I think, the mantra of what the unconventional classroom is.
Right.
Once you find your passion, share it, give it away. And one of the passions I found through the service of the community was just a passion to love people, serve people, that kind of thing.
And you continue to do that now that you're retired and on the other side of it too. And that's important.
Best.
Yeah.
But you do too, right? Each and every day, in your own life, there's all sorts of things that you find yourself doing.
Yeah. And I mean, my take on life of service is a little different than yours, but it is a little, it's motherhood. I'm a mom of two young girls, 5 and 8-year-old Evelyn and Rose. And now that they're just a little bit older, entering that, school age, and more independence, I'm able to kind of reflect on what my life as a mom has been. And, from the moment a woman gets pregnant, it's very much, you kind of put yourself aside because your focus and priority is really on that child. And it, obviously it grows once they're born, and you have to be the one to care for them and feed them and keep these little things alive. And it's pretty demanding. And you realize kind of, for me in my own life, I've only realized after, Evelyn's 8 years old. So now after 8 years, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm recognizing pieces of myself that were just kind of shelved for a little bit because I was so focused on them. So I'm, recognizing how much of a service I did give of myself, but now really taking enjoyment in like finding, who I was and bringing it back into my life. And now with my kids in tow, that they can now learn a little bit more about me and who I am, as opposed to always kind of being just so honed in on them, which of course I always am. But it's nice to be able to reflect back on who I was before them and introduce them to that woman as well.
Well, I think, actually it's funny, when I hear you say that, it resonates with me, because I think one thing that comes with a life of service, whoever you're serving, if it's your children, if it's the community, it comes with sacrifice.
Yes.
And when you're all in to anything, there is going to be a sacrifice that's made. And sometimes it's a sacrifice to self.
Yes.
Sometimes it's a sacrifice to the people around you.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
and
it really is a philosophy, right?
It is.
Yeah.
It is. Life
You're
of service
committing.
is that.
Well, this has been so interesting, and it's so nice to be able to kind of dig in deeper and find out, what it was that really called you into this this life of service. So, as you mentioned, your grandfather played a huge role, and I love just learning about all those little lessons that you've learned throughout your career. And we are going to learn so many more from Dave as we get into some following episodes. We're going to tackle, we're going to talk about curiosity. We're going to talk about how to sell a life sentence. We're going to dig into Dave's mind and find out what goes on in the interrogation room, how to get a confession. All sorts of really cool things are coming up on this podcast that I'm so excited to dig into deeper. And on the next one, we're going to talk about curiosity and why so many of us are so drawn to true crime. What is it about something that can be so gruesome and terrible that makes us kind of want to dig in? And is it good to be curious? We think sometimes it is, sometimes not so much. So we're going to get into that in the next episode as well. So thanks so much for this, Dave. Looking forward to the next one.
Oh, me too. I hope that, this paves the way for, a fantastic podcast where people will get some things, take away some things, maybe learn a few things that they can share and pass on to other people.
Yeah, sounds great. All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll see
you.
you, and we'll be here again next time for the Ride Along.
Thanks very much.
Well, we hope you enjoyed today's episode of The Ride Along, and if you're interested in learning more about Dave's career and the lessons he learned throughout, now that he's on the other side of it, be sure to pick up a copy of his book that he co-wrote with Sarah Cades called Skeletons in My Closet, and keep an eye out for his new release, Undaunted, with Susan Forrest.
My mantra of leaving people better than you found them continues to be my driver, and I hope you're leaving this podcast today feeling inspired, informed, and inclined to live your dash. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please be sure to like and subscribe. And take care, everybody. Thanks for joining us on The Ride Along.